Welcome to TAG FinTech Society, presenting real-time payments now more than ever. We're glad to have everybody here today. Our first business is talking about what TAG is doing. We're doing plenty of virtual events. Please make sure to check out tagonline.org for more events to attend. Our societies are doing them. We're also doing virtual happy hours, and we're doing executive insight programs once a month. So check it all out. We are also planning our FinTech South event. It is going to be a virtual event this year in October. Please look out for more information about it and how you can become a sponsor or attend or speak. Now I'm going to pass it over to Elizabeth McQuerry, who is going to be our moderator for today. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Rebecca. It's great to be here today, and I'm reflecting that it's been 3 years since we had our first lunch and learn at TAG on real-time payments. That was back when we were gathering physically at Maggiano's and having great food. Sorry, guys, and Irene, we don't have any even virtual foods to share today, but we do have a lot of folks who are sharing their lunch hour with us to hear about this exciting topic. And so much has changed in 3 years. So I'm Elizabeth McQuerry. I'm one of the partners with Glenbrook. We work on these issues and more outside of the United States than inside, but it is fantastic to have so much going on in the United States in this space now, contributing to really the knowledge base of what's happening globally. 3 years ago, it was just the opposite, where the US was taking in everything it had learned from the rest of the world as it was getting ready to do the implementation of RTP. Of course, there's a lot of other providers in the space that are adding to the richness and diversity and competition of what we have going on. So enough about the context. Now let's jump over and get our panelists to give them a brief introduction from each of them, and then we'll jump into the conversation. And we're also very clearly going to save time at the end for lots of discussion and take your questions from those of you who have joined us today. So I'll ask first Irene and Fred and then Steve to introduce themselves, and then we'll jump in.
Hi. I'm Irene Katen, and I am with Truist, and I run the Enterprise Payments Hub at the bank, and was involved with implementing RTP at Heritage SunTrust. Most of my background has been in electronic payments. I spent a lot of time with MasterCard introducing debit cards, was with CheckFree, with electronic bill pay, and have been with Truist for 9 years.
Hey, I'm Fred Fuller. I am with Levvel. Levvel is a business and technology consulting firm. We work in all verticals, but we focus and have deep roots in the payment space. So we work very closely with RTP. I personally have been in the payment space for about a little over 15 years. So I'm well versed in the world of payments. And I want to thank Elizabeth and Rebecca and TAG for putting this on and having us participate. We're excited to be here.
Hi, and I'm Steve Ledford. I'm the product executive for the RTP network at the Clearinghouse. And first of all, I'd like to say thanks to folks like Fred and Irene for actually making the network happen. Really appreciate that. I have been in payments for about 40 years now. Yes, I did start when I was about 5 or 6. But.
Thanks, everybody. So, Steve, you said for making the network happen. What does the network look like today? And when you say network, what are you really referring to? So give us a sense of that.
Yes, the RTP network, it's a brand new payment network. It's a real-time network in every way. Payments are made immediately, they're settled immediately, and where we really depend on folks like Irene and Fred and others is this needs to be a real-time experience from end to end, from the sender to the receiver. And that, of course, requires the financial institutions to be operating in real time as well. The network has been going since November of 2017. SunTrust was one of the very first users of the network. And what's going on with the network now? Well, we are now handling millions of payments a month for millions of senders and receivers. There are billions of dollars a month going across the network. And the things that are happening on the network right now are everything from payrolls. Just folks are finding it's useful in a lot of different payroll situations. Gig economy payments, the folks who deliver your dinner now that we're all in lockdown could very well be paid immediately using the RTP network. You have money in one of the digital wallets and you want to get to it, you can get to it using the RTP network, account-to-account transfers. And one of the more interesting ones we've seen recently has been business-to-business payments, where folks who are trying to put their supply chains back together in these trying times are finding it very useful to be able to pay their suppliers immediately so that they can get immediate shipment of goods that they might be running out of. And so it's a general purpose network, but the key thing about it is it does operate in every way in real time.
Kind of sounds like a central nervous system.
Kind of like that, yeah.
Yeah, it's at the heart of things. So Fred, I know that you've and Levvel have been working with all sorts of potential participants, or those like that have already gone on to the network. What are you hearing about the experience, and what's coming up in terms of, or what their concerns are? And then we're going to turn to Irene, I hope, for some validation of that and some first person perspective on your experience at Truist.
Yeah, so the experience, what we're seeing right now is obviously there's a tremendous amount of interest given COVID and everything that's happening in the marketplace. And one of the interesting things that's developing is, I think if you rewind, 6 months or maybe a little bit further, it was perceived to be something that was for large FIs and not necessarily for some of the smaller players. And we are seeing an incredible amount of interest amongst smaller FIs right now that know that they need to be in the network, and this is a game that they need to play in. And part of that is just the evolution of technology. And then of course, COVID has helped to accelerate that. The beauty of RTP is that it really allows the financial institution to sort of throttle the effort, right? So as a financial institution comes into the network or evaluates coming into the network, there's a series of questions that they need to ask. Do you want to do a direct implementation or an indirect implementation? If you go indirect, then you need to pick a third-party service provider. As you evaluate going into the network, what personas do you want to work with? Do you want to go receive? Do you want to do send and receive? Do you want to do send, receive, and request for payment? So there's a lot of opportunity there to really, like I say, throttle that level of effort that a financial institutions have to put forth to go make it happen. And then the last thing I'd say about this is that it's actually provoking an overall evaluation of sort of what does the tech stack look like and what is that strategy, because as you go down the RTP path, you have to evaluate those things, and you have to think about that strategy, not just for an RTP implementation, but what does your entire payments ecosystem look like if you fast forward 2 years? And how do you remain nimble for other players that might come in with a slightly different flavor and allow you to take advantage of different functionality and ultimately better serve your customers? So we're seeing a lot of interest up and down the sort of food chain, if you will, in terms of the size of FIs. And RTP they've done a great job of building this so that you can go in and you can bite off what it is that you can chew, what it is that you want to undertake, and then go forward. And so there's a lot of interest, but it's provoking also a greater level of evaluation of where are we with our modernization and where do we need to go.
So how does that sound from the perspective of the experience that you had, Irene? It sounds like a lot of, it's more than a new payment system in a way, or is it?
No, he was right, Fred was right on. It's a major undertaking for a financial institution because it impacts every area of the bank, the deposit system, digital, fraud, operations, settlement. And so it is a big undertaking of the bank, and both SunTrust and BB&T looked at it as a journey. Both started as a receive persona and moved into the send persona. Heritage BB&T is piloting send, whereas SunTrust was on that journey. With the merger, we're holding off a little bit. And then the third step would be accepting the request for payment, which we will be looking at as we build our Truist digital experience.
The request for payment is very exciting. To talking more about that. I'd like to hear about some of the use cases. We already have a question that really refers to whether or not business payments, or if the business users are really going to be driving the network. But Irene, what use cases are you seeing or pushing forward at Truist?
So the use cases from a corporate perspective that we see is corporate disbursements, incentive payments, insurance or workers' comp claims as we talk to our clients. As Steve said before, we are seeing payments to the gig workers in the network today. And companies that use a lot of contractors, for example, title companies who use appraisers and lawyers to search the titles, and also cash on delivery companies.
I'm going to ask Fred if that looks any different when you get to some of those smaller institutions and they're gaining interest in joining the network that you talked about?
Sure. I don't know if it looks a whole lot different, but we're seeing a lot of the same things that Irene just talked about. What is interesting about the network, and one thing we have seen, is this sort of element of internal transfers. So financial institutions move money amongst themselves all the time, right? And there are a surprising number of financial institutions that actually use checks to do this. We have one partner that said, wow, we can eliminate checks. We can use these rails to move money back and forth. And then we go from $2 or whatever the number is, right, to process a check into pennies on the dollar. And so the financial institutions are incredibly, they're supremely happy when they realize that there's a return on investment for an internal use case only over the next 12 to 24 months. Because that's what drives everybody. If you tell me I can get my money back tomorrow, I'll spend $10 million, right? But if you tell me it's going to be a 10-year payback, well, I don't know that I can afford that kind of exposure while I'm waiting for something to take flight. And RTP has really taken a hold in a big way. And so while you're waiting for the rest of the network and merchants and all the adoptions to take place, there are real-time, real-world applications that take place within the walls of the financial institution itself. So commercial banking is another one, right? Disbursements is as we see that start to evolve and become a bigger player in the marketplace. Bill pay, how does bill pay interact with RTP, and how can we leverage this to become more efficient and really get into that real-time scenario? I think, Steve, you mentioned paychecks. I hope I don't steal your thunder here. But Paychecks has been in the news recently, and they're using it for payroll services. And what that does is it goes beyond that real-time payment and the satisfaction that you get, and it actually is a great risk mitigation tool, because it's my understanding that the payroll company pays the employees, and then the company that employs those folks reimburses the payroll company. So if there's a 2 or 3 day lag in there and I'm paying enough people, there's a lot of exposure in there for a company like Paychecks. If I turn this into RTP, I'm paying them real time, they're paying me real time, and I go to bed at night and all that stuff is done and dusted and settled, right? So the promising thing is that the use case, I think we're just scratching the surface on the use cases. I really, really do. And I see, I've seen headlines now about how it's playing into open banking and some of these other new technology things that are really, really starting to blossom out there. So a lot of use cases, some internal, some external, and we're even starting to see some merchant settlement type stuff come into the game as well.
Yeah, Steve, you've been nodding your head a lot. I think you've got some things to say. You're also on mute for the second. And could I also ask you to comment on the bill pay as well?
Yeah, first of all, I wanted to really pick up, I love the way, Fred, you said banks are transferring money amongst themselves and they're still using checks and other mechanisms. And one of the things we never realize is how much of that just transferring money among banks goes on and how folks like the experience they're getting with RTP. And first of all, we don't actually deal with the end customers. That's folks like, well, like Irene and the folks at Truist who are doing that, but we hear the stories. You know, you mentioned merchant settlement or merchant funding. That is actually coming on very strong, especially now because cash flow has gotten to be such a big deal, you know, because of, you know, recent things and having the economy and the lockdown. But when we raised the value limit from 25,000 to 100,000, we saw a flurry of activity that was explained to us as folks are now using it for moving money around between their accounts at various banks. A company might say, I need to make a payroll out of this account or something like that. And that that type of activity we weren't really expecting. The other one, individuals who have multiple accounts seem to be using it a lot more than we ever anticipated to move money between their various bank and savings accounts. And all of those things really, they add up to a diverse number of use cases. There's really not any one killer application that seems to be dominating here.
I hear about individuals moving money between accounts a lot. So self to self at different institutions or into moving things more quickly to maybe make a purchase of some sort during the day. What about P2P? Do we think we're seeing this in the real RTP network? Too many acronyms here. So sorry.
P2P on RTP. Well, first of all, we're seeing it among with folks who already had set up transfers, and some of those are actually going to, hey, mom, you know, that type of thing. We know that that's a use case that's fairly active, but we think we're going to see a really big pickup on that later on this year when we've already done some small test transactions where folks are using it to move money and requests for payment and things like that for Zelle. We've done some tests, but that's going to really pick up. We have some banks that will be implementing that latter part of this year, early next year. And so Zelle traffic, which was settled on a after the fact basis, will now be able to move the actual settlement amongst the banks is going to happen in real time. And so that'll be a really big P2P use case.
And what percentage of, more or less, financial institutions that are on the network now also use Zelle? I mean, I can throw this out to any of you, or Irene, I don't know if you want to comment from a Truist perspective. I know you're on the corporate side, but what you know, how are we going to differentiate between these two for the end user?
So Truist is a member of Zelle as well, and so our customers are using Zelle for the P2P. And on the network, we are seeing more me-to-me, where clients are drawing down from their Venmo or their PayPal accounts to put it into their Truist accounts, and they want it right away. But I think as RTP and Zelle continue to merge, we will start to see more of the P2P going through the RTP rails.
And by the way, this is not an RTP or Zelle kind of thing. Folks who are using Zelle, if we do it right, they won't know that it's going over RTP. In fact, I would say for most consumers, they'll never really know that the RTP network is a network or a thing. It's not something I have to think about because folks like SunTrust are making it where they don't have to. I've got to have an account at SunTrust, and I get payments that come in, and they are labeled as an RTP payment, but quite frankly, I just know the money shows up immediately, and I got the money. That's what's great about it. And the same thing on the send side. The banks that are enabling it, they'll typically say, do you want to send the money now? They don't have to say on the RTP network. It's just getting there.
Before we move off the P2P aspect, I mean, is it possible for me to say I want to send to another phone number on RTP like you can with Zelle and the directory that they have?
Well, that would be enabled through Zelle or some other directory. We are the plumbing. Our job is not to be that end user, application, that type of thing. We want to enable those for others. And so if you're using, if you're using one of the platforms that does enable that, the use of the alias, it'll work. It's just, we're not going to get into that because other folks are already doing that. And I think that's one of the important things about real-time payments is it's a cooperative thing. Just like I mentioned earlier, we depend on Irene and Fred to get the folks to get the applications working. We want to work with the various bill pay and person-to-person and account and B2B platforms and make them work better. We don't need to compete with them. We just want to be able to make sure that they have access to a fast, immediate, high-quality network.
And from a client experience, I want to just reiterate what Steve said. In the same way that clients are used to going to e-commerce sites and picking how soon they want goods delivered, is what we want to see in the money movement sections of our bank. A client goes in and just says, I want this payment now, either by a routing number or an email or a telephone number, and give them the choice of when they need that payment to get there and how they want it sent, but not necessarily the rails. We will choose which rail based on what they select.
Fantastic. I want to pick up on this issue of linking to directories and perhaps linking in the system. I believe it was you, Fred, who mentioned the coming up in the conversation more and more of connected or open banking. If you could comment on what people are talking or asking about there.
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying that a few years ago, I was working for an organization. I wasn't working for Levvel, but I was working for an organization that was playing in the financial services space over in the UK. And PSD2 was about to go into effect. And so it was a mad scramble to figure out what do we need to do? How do we plug in? How can we be compliant? But the bigger head scratcher was, what does this mean and how does it work and how are people going to use it? Like, it's kind of a waste of time. And now, fast forward, whatever it's been, 2 or 3 years, and you can see those applications popping up every single day. So I would say in the last week, I've probably seen 4 articles that show, a joint venture, if you will, or a partnership between these large legacy financial services companies and fintechs that are coming together to build out open banking functionality. And the first use case is payments. So, when we go in and talk to FIs, so often one of the things that they do is they say, yeah, we want to go and we want to implement RTP, but we also need to really evaluate the implementation of an API gateway, right? Okay, and so why are you talking about that? Well, we know open banking's coming. It's getting adopted pretty heavily over in Europe, and we know that it's coming to our shores. So we just need to be ready for that. So I think the world of open banking and payments are going to collide, and they're already doing it, and that collision will continue to strengthen. And I think that RTP is well suited to be a major player in that space as it develops and evolves. So that's the role that we play, and what we see with our partners is just this overarching theme of, while we have the hood up, RTP and payments is very important, but we need to look at things from a more holistic perspective. We need to take a very strategic approach to this and make sure that we have the plumbing to take advantage of all these things. And it all comes back to the customer, right? What do customers want? When I step up to a merchant and I want to pay that merchant, I want it to be the most seamless thing possible. I don't want to have to worry about making decisions. Kind of what you said, Irene, I think of like, the customers will get to choose how they move that money, and then we will move accordingly. We will do that. And so that's what we're seeing in the world of open banking, is really bringing these two evolutions together to create strength and drive that innovation, really.
And Fred, I'm glad that you mentioned the customer as being the important part of this. Clearinghouse, we really are very supportive of the initiatives that are helping to make a safe environment for sharing of information. We one of the founding members of FDX, which is coming up with standards for how financial institutions can work with some of the tech providers to make sure that customers have the ultimate say in how their data is being used. And we're also one of the founding members of Akoya, which is creating a platform for financial institutions to work with various providers and provide that permissioned access. So the customer says, I want to share my data with XYZ Corp, and I want to do it for these reasons, and if I change my mind, I can. So I think we need to think about this starting with the customer, no matter what we do.
Yeah.
Do you want to add anything on open banking, Irene, and how it looks from your corner of the world?
With the merger, we are working on our API strategy as well. And, a big part of that is our payments hub, where, our clients can communicate with us and we can direct the person saying they want to send a wire or an ACH. So again, it's all part of our overall payment strategy, is to include the open banking and the APIs.
Fantastic. And Steve, I want to ask you to go back to request for payment, and I know that's a major focus for the clearinghouse this year. And, what's that going to mean for us?
Yeah, request for payment, first of all, I'll explain what it is. And it's exactly what it says it is. It is a request to be paid. If I send one to you, Elizabeth, I'm wanting you to pay me. But it is not a debit. It doesn't happen automatically. It's a way I can say, please pay me money. And then you give your bank or credit union the instruction to, yes, go ahead and make the payment. We see this as being an important part of both bill payment going forward, as well as an important part of a lot of business-to-business invoice payments and those kinds of things. And what we're trying to do is put the pieces together that we've been trying to put together for years. And so the idea here is I would send a request for payment. It would then be linked to a consumer bill, maybe if I'm Georgia Power, or it could be linked to an invoice. Maybe I'm, widget company and you're a buyer. And you would be able to then take that and make the payment. Some of the advantages are the request for payment has everything in the request message to make a perfect payment. We know that close to 1% of all bill payments coming out of electronic bill pay end up going into some sort of an exception process because the information is just not right. This way you prevent that. It really combines some of the best aspects of both the biller direct. The biller can time the payment. They can make sure it's being done in a way that they can take full advantage of it, reconcile it, that type of thing. But it puts the customer in control of how they're actually making the payment. We're having a little bit of activity. I think I mentioned earlier we had some Zelle alias routed requests for payments that have gone through the net. We're going to test or a small pilot kind of basis, but we're going to be launching a pilot the latter part of this year, working with financial institutions where they are going to be enabling their customers to receive and make payments on the basis of a request for payment, and billers to send them and have them come in a way that they can then update their records. That'll be done on a pilot basis later this year, and we expect to see that actually becoming more and more common and more widespread as we go into next year. And the similar things will be happening among B2B payments. There, I think, we'll see a lot of use by some of the existing B2B platforms as ways of bridging the gaps between the islands of automations that they have.
So how does a biller work with their financial institution? Or do I go on to my, Georgia Power site and say, I want to do request for payment? I mean, how does the consumer and the biller and the bank all get that aligned?
Okay. The design that, and again, we don't come up with end user interactions. That's for others to do. However, we came up with a reference design. And part of the reference design is that there would be in the way that they normally interact with their customers on their websites and such, there would be a way of saying, I know you've been paying us through our Bill of Direct portal. Would you like to be able to have these requests that come to you that you'll be able to automatically pay through your financial institution? Probably a fairly simple type thing. The key is that unlike a lot of the e-bill products where you have to coordinate with a specific platform at the bank that's presenting the bill, it can be done in this universal request for payment kind of format. And so the other thing is it gives financial institutions the ability to integrate it into their mobile or their online activity. And what's really important to the billers is they can do it maybe at the beginning of the month when the bill goes out. But let's say it's that last day and they still haven't been paid, they can send out a request for payment that acts as a reminder and gives the customer the ability to pay. The key here is that because of the immediate nature of the way the bill is delivered and can be paid, it allows the biller to really incent good behavior and to learn from the experience and have it adapt over time.
And Irene, are you guys experimenting here already?
We are not at the point of experimenting with requests for payment. At SunTrust, we are in the receive only mode, and at BB&T, they are piloting with the send, but the next step would be the request for payment to support it, to receive it and send the payment out.
And I'll ask this one to Fred on request for payment, and then we can move to a separate topic. I also see some great questions coming in that we'll get to shortly. But Fred, what are you hearing from even or in particular, the smaller institutions that are interested in joining the network, and how requests for payment would be useful for them? Or is it not, if you will, an immediate use case?
No, it's funny because it's actually, we talked to a few organizations lately that have moved it to the top. So typically what organizations want to do is they come out and they say, hey, we'll do receive only, right? It requires a little less heavy lifting on the fraud side. Then we'll go into the send realm. And there's been this really interesting movement or interest in RFP kind of moving to the top of that food chain, right? So what I really want to do is I want to be able to remind somebody that they owe me money and I want to get that money. That's what we want, right? That's what all the financial institutions want. And so it's raising some very interesting use cases. So I don't think there's a shortage of interest. It really is a matter of, in that implementation process, as you're doing the heavy lifting and evaluating your tech stack, does it make sense? Does it really make sense? And is it the biggest bang for the buck? Again, if the internal transfers are where I can get that quick return on investment, maybe I should focus my time there. But I think with all of the functionalities and with RTP as a whole, we talked about these use cases. And they evolve every single day, right? There's use cases out there that Steve and the Clearinghouse and Irene at Truist, I mean, there's people haven't even thought about, right? And all of a sudden we stumble into one and go, oh my gosh, this is, it's a eureka moment. And request for payment holds that same promise. So there's a lot of interest in it and actually moving that up in terms of the rollout process.
One of you, I think it was Steve, talked about safe data sharing. But now we can talk about safe payments in this world of COVID. And I'm curious how, our new environment has affected the conversations and the outlooks that you're having, and in particular with RTP in particular. What can you share with us, Irene, about how this is, the health situation has affected your customers' outlook and needs?
Well, I think it affects all of our customers, both the consumer and the wholesale customer. So if you look at even ourselves as we're making purchases now when we go out, people are going to want more touchless payment methods. So even the request for payment, I can see going to the dry cleaner to pick up my clothes and have them send me a request for payment so I don't have to touch my card or their machines or anything. It's all in my device. Same thing with corporate, with everyone or most people working remotely now. There are people in the office to pick up checks or to print the checks to get out. So this is all, I think, speeding up the demand for more electronic payments, and RTP is a part of that.
Okay, Fred, I'm going to ask you the $6 million question. Is my dry cleaner going to send me a request for payment in the near future?
Any moment now. No.
Okay. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, come on. You get it? No, well, sure. One day I think they will. I think, you know, as it evolves, like, does your local dry cleaner who has 2 or 3 locations, are they going to be able to tap into this network and leverage this functionality? I don't, not tomorrow. But as it evolves and it becomes commonplace throughout the entire merchant ecosystem, and we become more plug and play, I think potentially yes. Steve, I don't, you know, you may have a different view. You see more from, we deal so heavily with financial institutions. You may know more use cases out there. But I think so. And I think in terms of, you know, COVID and what's going on and how that's driving adoption, I think the interesting thing that we're seeing, and I mentioned it a little earlier, is these smaller financial institutions that wouldn't have the appetite to spend the money on something like they have to, right? You can't, it's like bill pay. Like, you know, 20 years ago or whatever the time frame is, bill pay was a thing that for some period of time, it was a nice to have, and it was interesting for the customers, and it made us look like we knew what we were doing from a technical perspective. Today, you have to have it. Like, I don't know how you open a financial institution today without bill pay. I firmly believe that RTP will be table stakes in the next 3 to 5 years. And I think these smaller financial institutions understand that, and they've embraced it. And it does come back to something we talked about a moment ago, which is it's what the customers want, right? Like, I don't want to touch money. You know I've paid for something since COVID started with money and just been kind of like, you know, keep the change, right? Like, I don't want to deal with all that. And so I think that's commonplace for people everywhere. And the financial institutions know that they have to meet this demand. So they have to step up and spend money and answer this question and solve this problem for the ecosystem as a whole.
Yeah, well, Fred, one thing you mentioned a little while ago is that there will be use cases that Irene and I can't think of. And Irene's probably way ahead of me on this, but I see use cases all the time already that we didn't imagine when we were designing this. I mean, Irene, you were involved in a lot of the early work where we were thinking through how this was going to work. And we never imagined that something like instant payroll would even exist. I mean, that came out of nowhere. And we're hearing about things that folks are doing on the network that we never would have counted into our case. We're revising our projections just because we're seeing more interesting uses that we didn't know existed. And so I think it's going to change the way, you know, one thing, for example, right now businesses will often pay multiple invoices with one payment. But as we move to more of a just-in-time ability to deliver invoices with a request for payment, and folks want to time it to their cash flow, we wonder, are we now going to see more actual B2B payments, but they're tied to one invoice at a time because of the control that gives the payers? We don't know. And I think that's really kind of the cool thing about it is I like feeling a little bit dumb every day when I hear about things that are happening or doing or implications that we never anticipated, because that shows that hopefully we have a platform that will be able to adapt through the ages instead of be stuck in just one point in time.
And Steve, can you tell us anything about the volumes on the network? I think we heard millions and millions a month, but what does that mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we haven't published anything yet, but we're definitely doing millions a month, hundreds of thousands a day. We look at unique users, both senders and receiver. That number's in the millions. And so we'll be announcing some things fairly soon. It's just that we're in a fairly rapid ramping up in growth stage. We've been, growing, 15, 20% month to month. So that's a fairly high base. Admittedly, when we started the year, that was off of a fairly low base. So you can't grow that fast forever, but we're well on the way to putting up some pretty big numbers. So,
well, they sound impressive to me. So,
okay.
Be looking forward to seeing them. I want to get you guys to respond specifically to some of the questions that we've had, and then we'll jump back. One person is asking about how requests for payments work as far as being authorized to pay. How does that work? This is the question from Bob Dow.
Well, I mean, what the rules say is that each one has to be approved by the sender. And that's something that they approve so that they're with their financial institution. These are all credit transfers. And so every payment starts with a customer of a financial institution telling their financial institution, send money for me. In the case of a request for payment, they're saying, send that particular one. But the way it actually gets done is going to depend on the actual application. I don't know if, Irene, you have some thoughts on the different ways that might be done.
Correct. So as it comes into the bank, it's envisioned that it will come into a mobile or online banking platform as some type of a message. And the client would, need to put in their credentials and approve that transaction to go out.
So the client would get, in your visualization, would get a notification off their Truist app that says, hey, you've got requests for, transfers?
Correct.
Okay.
Or an alert, and they'd have to log in and go in and approve it for it to be sent out.
And I'm going to put you on the hot spot here, Irene. We have some questions about pricing. So largely about to the end users. Are banks typically charging account holders for RTP, or how do you look at your revenue model here?
So when receiving an RTP, there is no fee to the clients, but we are putting together a pricing strategy from a send perspective. We're in pilot now, so the pricing is not indicative of what it will be in the industry, but it will be on the send where the pricing will happen.
So I think I'll go to Fred and ask him if he's hearing any, has any sort of broad market evidence about what send institutions are charging. We had a question about possibly seeming a higher price versus an ACH, whether or not consumers would want to go for that. I think you're on mute, Fred.
Maybe deliberately.
There we go. Well, I could have stayed on mute because my answer stinks. The truth is, we actually do a good job of steering clear of that particular conversation because we come in and we are an integrator, right? So we come in and we help you ask all those questions up front and help you get through the implementation process. The pricing conversations are things that take place between the clearinghouse and the financial institutions, and we leave that up to their customers. So we tend to steer clear of that, and it's very intentional. I would hate for us to be in a situation where we're talking to client A, they start talking about pricing, which is all highly confidential, and then we're talking to client B, and they've got different terms. That's not the role that we are equipped to play, quite frankly, and so it's best if we just absolve ourselves of that kind of conversation. So I hate to give you that answer, and I don't know if Steve wants to elaborate, but that's kind of where we are, and I don't want to put myself in an awkward position. Steve, sorry to do that.
Potatoes moving.
On advice of counsel, I can't even acknowledge that the question was asked. So.
All right. Well, how's that, Elizabeth? I put us in the ditch. Sorry.
All right. Now we'll give Steve a softball. Who owns the RTP network?
Not me personally. No. So the clearinghouse operates the RTP network. The clearinghouse is owned by the roughly the 23 largest financial institutions in the U.S. And we operate not only the RTP network, we're one of the operators of the ACH network. We have a check image clearing network and a wire transfer network, as well as a tokenization platform.
So I want to just ask a couple of questions about the larger competitive environment. And of course, there's multiple options in the marketplace already. We believe in the relatively near future, we're going to see also the Federal Reserve come into this space with FedNow. Possibly 2023, I believe, is what is the prognosis on that. And, you know, that's going to make an even more, you know, competitive landscape for the providers and ultimately the consumer. So I want to ask Irene how you think about FedNow coming into the market. You said you already have Zelle and RTP. I mean, obviously this is a very early decision or very early look at this, but I mean, how do you think about that? Whether or not you will connect to them or you'll do so early, later, you don't know. What's the thought process?
So we have made, you know, a major investment in RTP through the clearinghouse. So we are really interested in understanding how they would be interoperable. So we don't have to make a second major investment. And it's not clear yet on the timing of FedNow. We're in the middle of a merger. So it has not been on our plate at the moment. We really are looking to see if there's a solution where it could be interoperable with the clearinghouse.
And Fred, is that one of the big questions that you're hearing about forward-looking interest in you know, participating in this space?
Yeah, I think the challenge is obviously this creates a great solution for smaller institutions that don't have deep pockets, right? But it's always balanced with speed to market and cost associated with, you know, how soon can we get out there and functionality and so forth. So I think FedNow creates a great option. It kind of reminds me of I was in a meeting years ago and we're sitting in the meeting and somebody came in and they started talking about a competitor coming into the marketplace and everybody started getting worked up into a frenzy. And I kind of was like, what's the big deal here, guys? More players in a space legitimizes the space, right? And sort of a rising tide lifts all boats. And so we encourage the financial institutions and folks that are interested to really look at FedNow. And Irene brought up the word interoperability. Thanks for bringing up a big word that I can't say, Irene. But Irene brought up that, and I think it's very true, right? So FedNow is an option. It is another tool in your payments arsenal. I don't think you should look at it as a binary decision, and that's what we encourage all of our clients or prospects to think about. These are two options. They're both going to have their place. And so as you, again, look at that long-term strategy and vision and how you build out RTP and an API gateway, then these are the things that you need to consider of what's coming in the future and how can you quickly adopt that new technology. So there's a lot of interest in it. And look, there's a lot of concern, to be totally honest. We're talking about something that would happen in 23 or 24, I think are the last numbers that I saw. Will that slip again? We don't know. What happens in the next 2 to 3 years in regards to the evolution of technology? It's moving fast, right? So I think it is a bit of a backstop or a safety net for some of the smaller financial institutions, but we really encourage a more holistic view on the ecosystem.
Steve, you're getting a lot of hot potatoes for lunch. So we'll throw this interoperability word to you. Are these two systems going to be interoperable?
Well, you know, we're having discussions, as you can imagine, with the Federal Reserve as they design the network. One of the things that we find is particularly encouraging is that the Fed is, first of all, they've said that they will be using the ISO 20022 as the basis for their messages, which is the same as we use. Even more so than that, they have indicated, I don't know if they've made a final decision, but they've indicated that they would like to make sure they're aligning the way they implement ISO 20022 with what we're doing with RTP. That's a very good start because what that does is it makes it a lot easier to integrate with both of them. If the messages, those kind of things are the same, it takes a lot of the burden out of it, and you should be able to get, you know, it makes it a lot easier. I will tell you that actual being able to be on one in exchange with the other is very, very difficult. It's never actually been done on a real-time system anywhere in the world. And so we're not sure how one would do that. But, you know, there's several years to think about that. Also, there's been some good work done. I'm going to put in a little bit of a plug for the Faster Payments Council. The Faster Payments Council actually published a paper on understanding interoperability. It's a very complex topic. There's a lot of moving parts, but it was looking at different ways that one can look at interoperability between payment systems in general. So hopefully that will help inform. And the Federal Reserve was actually a very important contributor to that work as well. So there's a lot of work being done, but this is one of those questions with a lot of moving parts.
Well, thank you for passing the potato and taking a bite out of it at the same time. I'm going to ask everybody to give a final reflection, outlook, comment. But before we get into that, maybe we'll ask one of the questions to Fred, which is about something marketplaces like Amazon and whether or not they could or would or should take advantage of RTP functionality as merchants. And then I'll go to Irene's, Fred, and we'll let Steve have the last word today.
Yeah, we'll Irene and I will build up one more hot potato to put on Steve's lap. No, I think, I mean, I think they should, right? So it's when we talk about financial institutions and we talk about that sort of payments arsenal, if you will, or infrastructure, ecosystem, hub, whatever word you want to put on it, I think it's just as incumbent on merchants to make sure that they have as many tools available to solve the client's or customer's problem as a financial institution does, right? And it only strengthens the network. Here's the question, right? Like, who doesn't want money faster? Yeah, right? I mean, it's just that simple. Like, who doesn't want the convenience of this? And they do. It really becomes, I think, more of the question of which of these large sort of, Amazon is maybe not a fintech player, but they play in every space, right? And so if we're using them as the example, you know, why wouldn't they explore that, with the exception of trying to go do it themselves? But why wouldn't you tap into a larger network that's being utilized by all the players that get touched by a payment that's being processed? So should they? Yes. Will they? I don't know. But if you're interested and you're at Amazon, give me a call. We'd love to help you with that.
Well, they've certainly been one of the more, I think, adventurous, as you know, and forward-looking as payment acceptors. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if we saw that.
Right. Yeah.
Irene, what's your final take for today? I think she's having some internet challenges. It seems frozen there. We have lost her. All right, Fred, back to you.
Okay. Steve, you want me to elaborate on that a little more? You want Steve?
No, I'm happy to. Are you talking about just a final question? Or I can elaborate on the Amazon. And this is one of those things people often ask. So when you design the RTP network, you know, collectively, you guys, what kind of payments were you trying to displace? And my answer always is, if you build a payment system because you want to displace a certain kind of payment, you're doing it the wrong way. You need to build the best payment system you can. You need to think about ways that it's upping the game, that it's doing something a little bit better. We do not have any notion that every payment's going to go over the RTP network. We want to make it where anybody who wants to use it can use it, and we're folks are finding creative ways of doing it. I'm sure Amazon, they got some really smart folks. They're probably going to find lots of ways they can use the network. Put just about any name in there, and I think we're going to find that there's going to be use. How that's going to be done, I think that's where the creativity comes in. Our job is to run a network that's efficient, effective, you know, has higher functionality than anything exists. And if we do that, folks will find good uses for it.
Irene, thanks for coming back. Want to give you a chance to say a final, final thoughts on our conversation today.
Sure. So I think, you know, clients do want faster payments, but they also want to make payments whenever they need to make a payment. So we're finding, especially on the corporate side, that it's not so much that it's faster, but it's after hours from wires or on weekends when they can't send a wire or an ACH transaction and they need to get some payments out. And I think like any of the new payments that have been introduced over the years, ATMs, debit cards, etc., it takes a while to take off, and then all of a sudden it's a hockey stick, and it really takes off exponentially. And you know, this network has only been live for 2 years, and so you know, it is going to grow, and we're still at the bottom of the hockey stick. But as more banks get on and start moving from the receive persona to the send persona, and then the request for payment, it is quickly going to go up the hockey stick in growth.
Fred, any last thoughts today?
No, I think I think that RTP and the entire payment space is incredibly dynamic. I think it is critical for anybody that is impacted by this space to take notice and to evaluate what they need to do to remain relevant and provide good customer experiences. So again, thanks for having me. I think it's been a great panel. I've enjoyed talking with Steve and Irene. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Steve, you get the last word today.
Oh, well, thanks. No, I just say, first of all, thanks for inviting us all to talk to folks at TAG. I know TAG is an interesting and diverse audience. You got a lot of different ways to look at it. I would just encourage folks to do what Fred and Irene have been doing and really, you know, get smart about this. Think about how this fits into whatever your business is. I think you'll find there's ways that this can really make a difference and help you accomplish your goals. Just go ahead and get started.
All right. Well, I really appreciate the three of you coming on, sharing views. I think we had some fun and some hot potatoes. And I appreciate Tag and Rebecca having us here today. So, Rebecca, I think we're done. If we can go ahead and call it a day.